One of the most misunderstood things in Final Fantasy XIV are the mentor titles and icons, whether it's a PvE mentor, trade mentor, PvP mentor, which is one many players don't even know exists, or indeed the big mentor crown mentor. The purpose of the titles are frequently misinterpreted, both by massively underselling what the mentors are supposed to do, and massively overselling what the mentors are supposed to do. This leads to a situation where some players, for whatever reason, choose to be extra toxic towards players with these crowns, and simultaneously, this causes many players to simply not dare use the mentor crowns in the first place. On the one hand, that sounds like a quote-unquote a good end result, since it means only the real strong mentors wear the crowns. But the reality isn't so clear-cut, as it really just scares away the softer and more sensitive players that might have made good mentors if you gave them a chance. Now, that is a bit of an introduction to the topic, but let's talk a bit more in depth about mentors, their purpose, and how they get misunderstood. Let's start with what is the purpose of a mentor in Final Fantasy XIV? Whenever you attempt to enable a mentor crown on your character, you are prompted to accept the expectations of a mentor, which are 1. To provide gameplay advice for new adventurers and other players, just in general. 2. Be an exemplar for player etiquette. And 3. Invite new adventurers to the Novice Network and answer their queries in the chat channel. That's it. Now, an additional little detail to this is that some parts of this can come up a bit to interpretation. For instance, a mentor is not forcibly placed in a Novice Network chat channel while sporting a crown, so we can sort of assume that third requirement isn't as strict as you must be there in the Novice Network and answer queries. However, given that you are perfectly capable of inviting Sprouts to the network without being there yourself, inviting them as it makes sense still aligns with the quote-unquote job description. To briefly compare the Final Fantasy XIV mentor status with the real-life definition of a mentor, here it is effectively a senior giving practical wisdom and advice based on their own experience and knowledge to a junior or otherwise less experienced person. This doesn't seem too far from the Final Fantasy XIV description, although that one does add a bit more, right? Now, to some of the misconceptions, to which I have 3. The first one is the suggestion that mentors must be incredible players at the game to qualify to be a proper mentor. Ranging from being toxic towards mentors that are not living up to these expectations, up to making absurd demands towards what should qualify a player to be a mentor, with some of the craziest demands reaching that to become a mentor you must have cleared the current Savage raid tier, or beyond that, sometimes saying beating the most recent ultimate. An interesting counterpoint to this one is that some of the worst players at teaching other players how to do things in the game that I have met have been players that are consumed by beating this hardest content, because they reach a point of mastery where some of them completely forget where they came from, or alternatively they are so experienced with games that they never had a slow start with the game in the first place. They might tell you to simply press buttons because to them it should be totally obvious what the correct button to press is. They might not really care for the relative difficulty difference between content beyond casual content easy, hard content hard, and in the most extreme cases might even view the majority of extremes and savage as trivial or easy content too. This can make these incredibly skilled players terrible mentors if they don't really look past their own day-to-day experiences. In contrast, the second misconception, which is of course more a case of quote-unquote observations rather than expectations, is the suggestion that players with mentor crowns are worse than the average player. There are 2 sides to this. The first one is that due to the existence of the Mentor Roulette, we will get to this later, and the fact this roulette forcibly places the mentor crown on the players using it means you are more likely to see mentors in random content, meaning they're more likely to be surprised by what content they are in. They might not be experienced with the job they happen to be playing at the specific level they landed in the particular duty or type of duty they landed in, making them perform worse. They might not remember the fight well, also making them perform worse. Simultaneously, if you see a mentor failing, you are observing a mentor failing. You can see the crown. If you see someone with no icon failing, you're just seeing a player failing. If you see a sprout failing, to some degree, you'll be much more likely to excuse the new player as well. The mentor failing is similar to seeing a player with a legend title failing. It gives your mind something to latch onto and, judge them on. And the human mind is much better at remembering bad experiences than good experiences. So you could see 10 mentors play well in a row and they fall in with the tapestry. But you see one mentor play badly, and that is the one you remember. Sure, I'm not saying mentors can't be bad, they absolutely can, and it is a common issue with the system, but we don't need to imagine the problem bigger than it is. The third misconception is in regards to the behavior of a mentor. Some mentors are really rude or mean. This then combines with the previous misconception that mentors are all bad, and you have an excellent combo that mentor crown means bad player that is also a jerk. Given the second expectation of a mentor, that they are an exemplar of player etiquette, we can already immediately conclude that these mean or rude mentors simply should not exist. Now, they definitely do exist, but the way communication works in Final Fantasy XIV is that in large part, if no one complained, then what you said is probably okay, within limitations, right? This kind of stance means that people that like to communicate privately with each other in a somewhat rough way are allowed to. The guidelines of the game also invites players to try and resolve problems respectfully with words if they can first. But it does mean that if a mentor is being a jerk and you don't try to confront them about it and you don't report them either, then nothing will be done about it. It is also very likely multiple incidents must be reported before something actually gets done about it. So keep that in mind too. Now, each of these misconceptions about mentors can be somewhat traced back to the requirements to become a mentor in the first place. The requirements to become a mentor can all be fulfilled simply by playing the game a bunch. Sure, a better player might accumulate commendations faster, fulfill the requirements faster. But any player that desires to become a mentor can. This is further amplified by the fact that aside from specific icons to indicate certain actions, such as the looking for party icon that we see all over the place, am I right? Aside from the sprout, returning player, and mentor crowns, there aren't any cosmetic icons to put next to your name, leading a lot of players to become mentors simply to have a thing next to their name. And so, in a desire to have less of these kinds of mentors who just want the fancy crown, some players want the mentor crown to be nearly unreachable, even for players that might actually make good mentors. And sure, yes, you can absolutely help your fellow player without a crown next to your name. For the last misconception about the jerk mentors, I don't have much to say there beyond how it is incredible that players will be told they should be good examples for player etiquette, they ignore it because they can't read or whatever, and then choose to be jerks. At that point, the only option left is waving warnings and punishments over their heads because all other options failed to connect. But there are more reasons people become mentors, of course. And on that note, what exactly is the purpose of the Novice Network? As is presented when a sprout is invited to the network, it is a place for beginning players, sprouts and returning players I suppose, to share their experiences and ask questions, mainly directed towards the mentors that are there. It also emphasizes being polite and respectful. Similar to the mentor status itself, it is sort of vague, but based on the fact mentors are instructed to give advice in these channels and sprouts are told to both share their experiences and ask questions, the way I would interpret this is that the Novice Network is sort of like a classroom of sorts. The students hang out and talk and whatever they like. The teachers might participate, but the teachers go to their own break rooms, surely. This leads to a few confusing scenarios of their own that are somewhat commonly known depending on your data center. The first one is the Novice Network is World Chat misconception. Yes, technically, Novice Network is in Final Fantasy XIV the only public chat room that mixes players from all over the game server, making it a sort of world chat. Some players even specifically acquire a Mentor crown to regain access to this quote-unquote feature. Now, with my previous interpretation of calling it a classroom, that would be like graduating school and then specifically becoming a teacher and returning to that same school to come back to your homeroom. I guess this is perfectly fair, but recognizing that you are now on the other side of the room is probably significant. The second scenario is the Mentor's Bonus FC misconception. On certain data centers, Novice networks can feel particularly uninviting because it is essentially controlled by a handful of mentors using it as an extra link shell or FC chat. While the regulars may feel this is perfect and awesome, it makes this public-facing chat room like a closed clique and either you're cool or you're not. This reaches its problematic peak if mentors start booting players they don't like for bad reasons. Again, this hopefully is pretty rare. Ultimately, the problem with both of these scenarios is that, while the purpose of the Novice Network should be somewhat clear from context clues alone, sprouts are invited to join and hang out, mentors are there to help. If these things are not enforced in any way and aren't explained clearly and well, then how do we ensure it gets used right? Again, waving punishment over the heads of players shouldn't be necessary for them to not be jerks, right? In extension of that, while I said that the interpretation can be like a classroom, some people grew up with teachers that were more talkative and hung out with the students more, so they might have that same interpretation as I do, but due to their experiences, don't see it as having that difference between being a sprout or a mentor. It's not like the Novice Network stipulates that sprouts cannot teach each other either. Obviously they can. The different mentor crowns also sort of just indicate that a mentor has the basic knowledge of a given subject, but they themselves would, at the end of the day, need to evaluate with themselves whether they know enough about a subject before giving advice to a sprout about it. And similarly, even if the mentors are mainly there to answer questions, they also function as moderators and peacekeepers, and should probably also feel encouraged to participate in making an inviting environment, which may require being a bigger part of the regular conversation than simply answering questions. Which then leads us to the Mentor Roulette, the final keystone aspect of what becoming a mentor unlocks access to. The purpose of the Mentor Roulette is simply to select a random duty to send you to, based on the roulette itself. If you ask the Smith for clarification on what the Mentor Roulette is, the explanation pretty much only emphasizes the fact that the Mentor Roulette allows you to help fill in slots when other adventurers are short on people. It doesn't demand that you teach anything. You're just there to fill in the slot, and of course participate. Granted, given the complexity in the range of duties you can land in, some require that you do a bit more than just participate, since you can get anything from a Guild Hess to Abyssal Fracture Extreme, and to unlock the Mentor Roulette, you simply need to have completed all of these duties. Not in a special way, mind you, simply complete them, meaning unsynced counts too. What then leads to a lot of players to get the Mentor Crown in this context is that successfully completing 2,000 Mentor Roulettes is an achievement with an exclusive mount reward, which then leads to a few misunderstandings again. The first one here is that a lot of players assume or imagine that the Mentor Roulette is there to send guides to difficult content, essentially sending superheroes out to clear the duties. This is not the case, as you probably understood from the game's own definition of the roulette. In addition to this, it's not like if you queue for a duty as a first-timer or if you queue for an extreme that the game guarantees that you're sent along with a mentor in tow to teach you, which again underlines that that is not the purpose of the Mentor Roulette. There's also the simple fact that the sheer amount of extremes in the game makes it completely unreasonable to assume every mentor with access to the Mentor Roulette should know how to beat every single one front to back. However, I believe this misconception is actually a counterbalancing misconception that originates from the fact that a bunch of mentors somewhat rudely reprimand players for having the audacity to queue for an extreme duty, when technically the mentor queued for the anything goes roulette themselves. That's not how I see it, but it is the way that some people see it. Indeed, if there was no clear 2000 Mentor Roulettes achievement, then there would probably be a lot less mentors complaining about this. On the other hand, there would certainly also be way less mentors queuing for the roulette, as this achievement, despite how absurd it is, and the fact the mount isn't that special anymore, is the main draw for a lot of achievement hunters and collectors. However, to defend this position of some of these mentors that aggressively demand to not queue for extremes is that sometimes the problem originates with sprouts and other players that queue into extremes without having done any homework or preparation, and then surprised Pikachu face when the duty is actually hard, but possibly still refuse to take advice on the fight itself, if they even communicate in the first place. I personally have way over 600 Mentor Roulette duty clears, and I'd estimate that at most about a dozen of those duties actually became a problem in some way or another due to players refusing to communicate in some way or another. But, as I mentioned earlier, the human mind latches onto bad experiences much more easily than good ones, so for some mentors it doesn't take more than a dozen bad cases for them to lose hope. But from a more even-handed point of view, with the observation that mentors are not meant to be guides in extremes, the suggestion that you should do some homework before queuing for an extreme probably makes a lot more sense. Obviously, we all have our first run-in with extremes, and the only way to know that it is hard is to try it and fail, because the game probably doesn't say it outright. And maybe you even succeed the first few times without doing homework. And this then leads to the other confusing part about Mentor Roulette. Some, it's quite rare to my understanding, players feel compelled to queue for impossible extremes to catch mentors in them as some sort of punishment. The unfortunate reality is that the mentors these players want to punish will simply leave and take the L and do something else. In contrast, another rare type of behavior is mentors paying other players to spam queue guild hests to get easy clears. I don't really have much to say on these aspects, but I felt if I didn't mention them, they would seem missing. The problem with the Mentor Roulette that causes these misunderstandings, I think, is that the roulette describes itself so vaguely that it, just like the Mentor Crown and the Novice Network, leaves a lot open for interpretation, and players tend to then make their interpretations, and then possibly forget that it is their interpretation, and not actually what the game says. Based on what the game says alone, the Mentor Roulette's only purpose is to fill duties, and then obviously by extension of the carrot of getting 2000 clears, of course, help to successfully clear them. There's also the additional downside, which applies to both the Crown, the Network, and the Roulette, that only the mentors really are told their side of it, meaning it leaves all the non-mentors completely in the dark as to the purpose of these things from the mentor's point of view. Imagine if a pop-up somewhere actually explained what the crown with a sword means, when you land in a duty with a Mentor Roulette player for the first time. Or something. So, to summarize this discussion a bit, a lot of players appear to not really know what a mentor is supposed to be doing, and tend to make up their own mind on what it is and what it does. This includes both mentors themselves and non-mentors, obviously. A lot of people also don't really recognize the ability to teach as a unique skill to have, which leads to suggestions like demanding that only the most hardcore gamers can be mentors, forgetting that the players that most effectively qualify then are not that many, and only a subset of those are interested in teaching anyone anything at all. Imagine if you needed a PhD to teach in primary school. You need to be a professional sportsman to be a gym teacher. How many teachers would we then have? Obviously, being a mentor is not the same as being a teacher, but there is a little bit of overlap. Ultimately, this means that it is very rare for a Final Fantasy XIV mentor to actually be a solid gold medal mentor. Understanding the game well, being good at explaining it, knowing how most things work, and know off the top of their head the general idea of how to deal with a given extreme when they are suddenly placed in front of it. There are not many. And then again, not being perfect is also an avenue to teach. Exemplar in player etiquette also means showing the new players how to gracefully fail. And no, it does not mean screaming "heals" when you die as a tank and whatnot. But what do you think? Did you learn something new about the mentor system, regardless of how faulty it might be? With that said, I'm very interested to hear about some of your experiences with mentors. Maybe some good stories, maybe some bad stories, maybe how you feel about mentors in general. I would love to hear about it all in the comments. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, the sprout icon on new players can be removed by using the /NA status command, or simply editing your search info in the party members menu. Alternatively, the sprout icon is forcibly taken away once the character has completed the Endwalker post-game MSQ, as of now, as well as having played for over 300 hours on the character.